This one from the second chapter of the Gospel of John. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that to you and to me? My hour is not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now, standing there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim. He said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the chief steward." So they took it. When the steward tasted the water that had become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
If you're one of those people who like their stories straight and forward, with clean plot lines and satisfying endings, the Gospel of John will drive you to distraction. After reading Matthew, Mark, and Luke, who follow a similar narrative, we turn the page to read John, and it feels as if we're starting over. John tells stories that none of the other gospel writers tell, and intentionally leave out some that are considered key events. For instance, John alone mentions the woman at the well and the raising of Lazarus from the dead, but he doesn't tell us at all about the birth of Jesus or his baptism, no account of the transfiguration, or even the Last Supper. In John's gospel, the sayings and events in the life of Jesus are not ends in themselves. They are windows into the spiritual world. John also likes to keep us off balance, playing with our sense of time and loading words with double meanings. For instance, when Jesus tells Nicodemus that he must be born again, Nicodemus assumes that he means to re-enter his mother's womb. But Jesus is really talking about being born of the Spirit. And the writer makes a point to say that Nicodemus came to Jesus at night, which could mean that he came when after sundown, or could also mean that he came when he was in the dark. He doesn't understand. John also uses a lot of coded language, employing organic symbols such as bread and light, water and wine, vine and branches, to show how Jesus brings the love of God into the world, pushing us to see a reality greater than we could put into any standard language, greater than we could even imagine. So it's appropriate that the first public appearance of Jesus in this gospel is not at the Jordan River, at his baptism. It's at a party, a wedding reception to be precise, in Cana, a town in his home region of Galilee. But from what we know about weddings in the first century in Palestine, Jesus would not have been the center of attention if his presence would have been noted at all. This was no quiet affair with little bowls of pastel mints and mixed nuts served with punch and cake. This was a party that went on for days, with guests coming and going, running errands and catching up on a little sleep before returning to the festivities, requiring lots of food and drink. We're barely into the story when we read the ominous words, "When the wine gave out." Of all the problems that could arise at a wedding reception, this was the nightmare scenario. People coming off the dance floor would drift over to the bar, still laughing, full of cheer, and get the bad news. What do you mean you're out? Out of everything? Uncle Jack, already a tad lit, would greet that reality with more than a little hostility, demanding to see the person in charge. But that was nothing compared to the shame. How could they run out of wine? The tittering would sweep among the guests. I knew they were cheap, but this is ridiculous. And then later, if the marriage were to fall on hard times, the first response would be, well, they got up to a bad start, you know. Ran out of wine at the reception. 26 years ago at our wedding reception, the venue required us to use their catering service, including for alcohol. Ann and I were occupied greeting our guests that night, but it did seem that the wait staff were giving very generous pours on the wine, and a few people complained that they had just set their glass down after only taking one sip and turned away, and it mysteriously disappeared. It was no surprise then when the caterer went to Ann's dad after a while and said that they had depleted the wine that he had ordered. Would he like to buy some more? What do you say at that moment? At the wedding in Cana, it was Jesus' mother who noticed the problem. But instead of notifying the host or the wedding planner, she told Jesus, "They have no wine." "That's none of my business, woman," he said. "It's none of your business, nor any of mine. Don't push me." Scholars have debated just what's going on in this exchange. Mary doesn't ask Jesus to do anything. She just lets him know the facts. This is the first time we see Mary in this gospel, so we don't know what she expected to happen. I wonder if she thought that he should take his posse down to the liquor store to buy some extra bottles. Or maybe she was implying that he and his friends should leave a little early so that what was left would go a little farther. And Jesus' response has struck some as a surly way to speak to his mother. But if we see this whole event as a window into the spiritual world, as John always does, it starts to make sense. What Jesus literally says is, "My hour has not yet come." More than likely, this is the last of the four Gospels to be written. The author knows full well that the readers already know where this is going. There's no need to act as if they don't know about the cross and the resurrection. In fact, the whole narrative is framed to explain what that event will mean, the event that Jesus calls "my hour." For John, this is the time when Jesus would be revealed as the one bringing God's salvation, and it would be done in a dramatic and public manner that everyone would see. But that's still some time in the future. Jesus knew there was still much work to do before arriving at that moment. He couldn't give away too much so soon, but the clues are there. For instance, the wedding story begins with these words, "On the third day." The third day since when? Doesn't say. So why is that important? This seems to be another cryptic reference to the resurrection. And Mary only appears twice in this gospel. Here at the wedding, where she will toast a glass of the best wine with her son, and at the foot of the cross, where she will watch in horror as he is offered wine mixed with vinegar and water at the height of his suffering. For now, she leaves the timing to Jesus. She tells the servants, "Do whatever he tells you," and walks away. And now we see Jesus in a situation we find him in very often, in a place of deficiency and loss and despair, where the party is about to come to a crashing halt, choked off by the anxiety of wondering if there will be enough. Where we wonder if we are adequate to the challenge. Where illness and age eat away at our sense of self and robs us of our future. Where parents feel helpless as their children search for their own sense of identity. Where the news continues to bring us images of racist taunts that discount the words of others and stories of people sinking deeper into poverty. In those moments, we often feel like the waitstaff standing around the walls, able only to watch, to clean up the mess, but feeling powerful to do much more. Fill the jars with wine, Jesus tells them. Well, fill the jars with water, he tells them. This was no easy task. We're not talking about 16-ounce mason jars here. These are big stone vessels with a capacity of 20 to 30 gallons each. And there's no garden hose or outside faucet. So they're going down to the local well and drawing up buckets, going back and forth several times because there are 6 of these things. All this activity has caught the eye of the wedding coordinator, concerned that her careful plans were under threat. "What's all this?" she asked, peering into the pots. "The guests may be a little buzzed, but they'll know the difference between wine and water." None of the servants felt it was their place to answer her, so one of them just handed her a ladle. She dipped it into one of the pots, put it to her lips. She paused just for a moment, her eyes opened wide, surprised to taste not water, but wine. And not the cheap stuff. One that would please even the most sophisticated palates. I can imagine the coordinator running to the groom. "I must compliment you here. Here we are almost at the end of the celebration, and you're just now serving the best wine. Most people would serve that first when it would be noticed, but not you. And there is so much of it. You are most generous." And the groom's response would be, "What are you talking about?" Indeed, this story is told in such a way that assures us that Jesus is not just showing off by performing a miracle in front of an appreciative crowd. He does nothing to draw attention to himself. Only the servants are even aware of what happened. So if the purpose was not to put on a public display of his power, what was the point? This was the first sign that Jesus gave about his character and his mission, John says. Wine represents life and celebration and community. Jesus is the one who embodies the very life of God in this world and who invites us to participate in that life. The life he brings exceeds any alcohol-induced buzz or artificial social interactions. His life enlivens our black and white existence with color and causes flowers to bloom in the darkest corners of reality. The actual turning water into wine happens in the background as the story is told. Jesus seems to be more interested in the amount of wine produced. Jesus has supplied about 180 gallons worth. This was an impossibly massive amount, more than all the guests could handle, more than even the whole village could consume. I don't believe this was Jesus' version of party on. John says it was a sign, an extravagance of grace, an outpouring of himself that Jesus gives to all who are thirsty. There need be no more anxiety wondering if there is enough. God's love has been poured out in abundance, more than we can hold. There's your miracle. And God offers it time after time after time. Jesus opens a window onto a vision of the marvelous, expansive grace of God. It's almost too wonderful to grasp. Are we able to see it? With all the joy that permeates the end of this story, it's easy to forget that it begins in deprivation and scarcity, even crisis. You can feel the anxiety in the situation in Mary's words to Jesus, "They have no wine." But is that the last word? Anne Lamott, in her book Opening Instructions, tells of a family being interviewed on the news program 60 Minutes about their search for a miracle. There on the screen was the religiously devout mother, a painfully shy father, and their 10-year-old daughter bound to a wheelchair by spina bifida. Every year this family had traveled to Lourdes in France, joining a parade of millions to a shrine said to be the site of many healings and miracles. The seasoned correspondent, Ed Bradley, was giving the family a hard time for being so gullible, for making repeated visits when the girl obviously remained in the wheelchair. At one point, he turns to this girl and says, "When you pray, what do you pray for?" She replied, "I pray that my father won't be so shy. It makes him terribly lonely." Clearly not what he was expecting. Bradley looked surprised for just a moment, but then he quickly recovered. He kept pressing the family on the wisdom of spending thousands of dollars every year to go to Lourdes and still didn't have a miracle. The mother answered while looking at her daughter, "Oh, Mr. Bradley, you don't get it. We have our miracle." It seems that Ed Bradley, like most of us, was held captive to his own expectations and the limits of his imagination. Casey and Bob Baggett comment that the only miracle this reporter could conceive of was if the little girl had gotten up out of her wheelchair and walked. But in doing so, he missed the other miracles that had occurred. The growing love of a disabled little girl who was more concerned about her father than herself. A family under stress that was held firmly together by their shared faith. The tenacity of hope that brings joy and contentment even though hardships remain. This weekend, we remember a prophet among us who also opened a window onto another vision of extravagant hope. On the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in 1963, Martin Luther King called it a dream. He began his speech by outlining the many ways Black people in this country have endured pain, broken promises, and oppression. But he insisted that this was not the last word. So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, he declared, "I still have a dream. This is our hope. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that one day we will be free." The writer of the Gospel of John believes that Jesus is ushering in this new world of abundant love and hope right now. The life of the party is in the house. When trouble comes, he stands ready to take what is already present, to bless it and overwhelm us with grace. Amen.